What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Destination the Show. It is episode 73. It is Tuesday, March 25th. My name is Jamie Cameron, joined as always by a hopefully fully recovered Jeremy Nygaard. What's going on, brother? How you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. I hope to have less coughing fits tonight, but I mean, there still might be a couple.
You
Uh,
managed it well last week.
yeah, it was painful though. I'm still not 100%, but whatever I have is hopefully on its way out.
Okay.
I'll be fully recovered for the opening day festivities at Target Field.
You're
What is it?
going?
9 days from. Haven't missed one in well, I guess you can count the COVID miss, but everybody missed that
Okay.
one. Every home opener at Target Field, and I think the last one or two at the Metrodome as well. So
Okay.
I'm on a pretty good streak. It's like 15 straight or 16 straight or something.
Nice.
But it's like almost as many playoff losses as the Twins had consecutively. I think.
Nice.
So and I hear that your streak's ending.
My streak is ending because I'm going to be on a work trip that I had to reschedule because of my daughter's gymnastics practice schedule. These are the sacrifices a parent makes for their child, Jeremy.
Yep.
I'm actually very annoyed to be missing the home opener. I we have this like semi-new tradition in our house of like I will grab the kids early from school, make it a big thing, all of that, trying to get them into it. My son is really taken to baseball a lot in the last half a year, so pretty annoyed. What I am going to be interested in asking you as the proxy of the show at the first game at Target Field is what is attendance like? So I'm curious what you think that's going to look like. And then I'm also curious before I start complaining about things, what is your level of optimism as we head into the Twins' first game of the season, the day after tomorrow? Pablo Lopez against Sonny Gray in St. Louis. Your thoughts?
So first, I think attendance will be similar to every year
Okay.
for the opener, which is sell it or near sellout. I don't think it'll. I don't think it'll be like one of those situations where it's like, oh, where did everybody go this year?
Mm-hmm.
That starts on game two. And last year, it was either last year or the year before. One of my middle son and I went back. I want to say it wasn't the first Saturday, but like the second Saturday, and it was cold and there was hardly any people there.
Yeah.
We're actually going to go back. So we'll go to the opener Thursday. And I think we're going to go to the game on Sunday then
Okay.
because the Wolves play a home game as well. So we're going to hit up
Doubleheader.
both. Yeah.
Cool.
I would anticipate that the attendance will not be great.
Yep.
And I think that's kind of the big one. It's like how's and really that's not even like a huge deal because attendance in April is always low. My question is how's attendance going to be on the nice summer nights
Yep.
when people should be at the stadium, and they have been in the past, which I think segues into your next question: level of optimism. Right now, the reason for optimism is their rotation and their bullpen, and I don't know that we can necessarily say that that's been it lately, or have the amount of depth and um, ability for the pitching to kind of brace the team. And so I think there's always that reason to be optimistic at the beginning, just because 0-0 works the same for everybody.
Yep.
And they have a chance to get out of the gate. The weather in St. Louis doesn't look great for this week, but I just think when you can back up Pablo Lopez with Bailey Ober and Joe Ryan,
Yep.
you have a pretty good chance of coming out of that with a couple wins, if not just one win, and then move on. I think there's reason for it. The Central is kind of there for the taking again, and there's a lot of other question marks regarding this organization. But for once, finally, it's not the starting rotation.
100%. Speaking of question marks, you know what I was going to do, Jeremy, is transition into housekeeping, but I'm saving it to the end because you provided too good of a segue not to go there right now. The past couple of days have provided a little bit of a change of course for this episode. we were going to dig into the case for 1-1 in the 2025 draft, and we're still going to do that. We'll get to that in a minute, but we do have to spend 10, 15 minutes digging into, I'm just going to call it the Twins ownership mess, because that's what it feels like from this seat. So, article published in The Athletic a night or so ago, co-authored by Kim Rosenthal, Britt Giroli, and of course, Dan Hayes, highlights for anyone who hasn't heard. And we'll keep this brief because I'm sure folks are acutely aware of everything that's gone on so far. Allegedly, the Pohlads have turned down an offer, or not maybe a firm offer, but kind of a proposal of around $1.5 billion. And just to kind of level set here, most of the major financial publications value the Twins at somewhere in the $1.4 to $1.7 billion range. It also came to light that the Twins have $425 million in debt. Not uncommon, of course, for MLB orgs or sports franchises to have debt, but that figure is certainly puts the Twins in the upper echelon in baseball. Some other juicy details from that article were that Joe Pohlad potentially wants to remain heading up the org in some capacity after the sale. And so really this kind of detailed the Twins diving back into the sale process. I personally felt it painted a little bit of a bleak picture about where the Twins are in this sale process and whether they're even an attractive proposition to a potential buyer. So let me start with high level. What was your reaction to that? Anything you want to dig into, rant about, and just your thoughts on what kind of a proposition do you think the Twins kind of present post Ishbia pulling out of the running for the purchase?
So if we go back to the original conversation we had about this, where there was a lot of optimism, a lot of interested buyers, right? It was a right market. It was going to be great for the Twins. And I said, I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical that there's that many people interested. I'm skeptical this is going to go as well as people think it's going to go. I wish we could pull up some of those clips because I kind of questioned all of it. And I think what that was a leak from not necessarily the very, very top of Twins ownership, but someone very close to the top of Twin ownership, and excitement that they were going to get every dime that they asked for and more. And Ishbia was going to make that happen. And so when you have someone that's willing to spend everything, right? And then you have other interested people, all those other interested people don't really matter, right? They're just good to have as a backup plan, even though it never looked like it was going to get there. And then all of a sudden, whoop, there goes the rug. And you're left with all these other potential buyers that just aren't as serious or aren't as deep pocketed, probably. And so now all of a sudden, when you think you probably felt like you would get all of what you were asking for, which I don't know what that was going to be, right? 1.7, 1.8, 1.9, 2 billion. And now you're left thinking, man, I might sell this team for $1.5 million, and a third of that is just going to cover the debt that I already have. Like we're still talking about $1 billion, right? So I wouldn't feel less rich if I had $1 million compared to $2 billion. But I really truly think that this was just like a group of people that didn't really read the market correctly. And now they're left not necessarily holding the bag because the bag is still pretty heavy. They could get 1.5 billion, right? And so it's a sports franchise coming off COVID. That's where all this debt is from. And then you have the streaming thing where you're not getting the all this money that you thought you were going to get. So that's why this debt is going to add up. And then you just add the cherry on top that Joe Pohlad wants to remain in charge. Who's going to buy this? Who's going to want that? Nobody. Like nobody's going to. invest $1.5 billion and then let that guy stay in charge? Like, that's the reason that you're buying the team. So the pole heads have to go away. And so, do I think that they'll still sell if they want to? But I think this is a very good example of a group of people that have no like actual sense of reality. They're a bunch of rich people that have always got what they wanted, and now it's just not working in their favor. They're going to have to sell eventually because they don't know how to run this business very well. But they're not going to get what they want. They're still going to sell, eventually for less than what they think that they should get. They're still going to have debt, but that debt, because of how they run this organization, is going to keep increasing.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We wondered why playoff tickets all of a sudden were so much more expensive last year. Well, here's why, right? And then they don't make the playoffs, and then there goes the debt. You missed that playoff gate. That's huge. So yeah, I think they'll stay on the market. They might have to kind of pull them. They might pull them off the market to kind of gather their, get the tail out from between their legs and refigure things out. But I do think that they're still going to have to sell just to save face, because at this point, they're the villains. They've always kind of been the villains, but now they're definitely the villains. And the fans are all pointing their fingers at them. And so it might take a little bit longer than we hope. You were really, really optimistic early. And
this is what I get for bringing positivity to the show.
Yeah, well, in this case,
I deserve.
It's the pole ads. That's when we have to pump the brake. So give it a little bit of time. I think it'll still work out okay for Twins fans. It's just the richest people here have to kind of figure out that it's not going to go their way. And you don't become rich by not having things go your way, right? And so this is where, you lay in your back with the money strapped to you, and you kick your feet a little bit, and people feel not bad for you, and we move on. So I don't think people are going to stop coming to the games because it's still the owners. They just have to invest in their product, and the only way they do that is by watching their debt go up.
I don't think that people are going to stop going to the games. I do think that we're going to see a consistent erosion of what's already become poor fan attendance and poor and declining fan interest in recent years, right? And just to tack on for a couple of minutes onto your great summary, if anyone's really interested in this and digging in even more depth, I'd recommend the latest Wraith and Barrels podcast. They had Bridget Rowley on there talking through it, and it was very interesting hearing a non-Twins beat reporter, kind of outsider perspective. She does a ton of reporting on the business of baseball. And the reason I asked you that question, Jeremy, of like, are they an attractive proposition, is because increasingly I think the answer to that is no. I don't think they are. They're attractive in that the valuation of any sports franchise will just continue to increase over time, right? That's just going to grow and grow and grow. And so, if you just grounded in that, of course they are an attractive proposition and asset. But if you look at so many of what you might call the supplementary factors around the Twins, their ballpark, they don't own it. There's no commercial real estate around the stadium to develop. The TV deal recently, right? They're losing a massive revenue stream moving from their RSN to Twins TV. There's so many things playing down for the Twins in the past couple of years. And if we were to make a kind of line plot of how interesting and how exciting the Twins have been throughout their history, we could look at the inflection point of signing Carlos Correa. And since then, it's just been a slow and steady downhill drip drop over the last 2 years. They have barely signed any free agents. They've barely made any trades. The TV drama, now the ownership drama. I find myself increasingly convinced that this is not a sale that's going to happen anytime soon. I agree with you. Eventually they'll be forced to, because I don't think anything is getting better for the Polads by holding on to this asset. What is going to improve for you? How are your revenues going to increase? They're not. But I just think it's kind of the culmination of what's been a sad state of affairs especially if you live and die by the actions of the major league team over the past couple of years. This recent kind of turn of events may be ever so grateful that we cover the minor league side and the draft side, because it is a welcome distraction from the sad recent reality of the major league team.
So one thing that I would add is there's been more and more talk around the league of small market teams, right? So on the heels of this athletic article, there's a Baseball America article. I didn't read it about the Pirates. We obviously have whatever's happening with the A's not working. You have whatever's happening with Tampa Bay Rays not
No
working.
more stadium, right?
And so at some point, all these small market teams or smaller market teams are going to just continue to kind of go down the crapper, waiting for Major League Baseball to bail them out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to happen. There's not going to be contraction. They need more markets. They need more franchises. They need these. MLB needs these things to work. And by MLB, it's the Yankees, the Mets, the Padres, the Dodgers, right? The teams that have all the money to spend. They need these small market teams to work. Right now, that's kind of the haves and the have-nots, and they're not sharing. There is some sharing, but I do think in the next CBA, there's going to have to be more. And the haves just keep spending more, and more teams become your small market teams. Yep. And so when that becomes the majority of teams in the league, like something's got to give, right? Because you're going to have 4 teams buying all the free agents, and the other 26 teams, like, well, now what do? We can't spend. And so it's obviously that's an exaggeration, but I do think that there's going to be, and we've talked about the TV deal not being great for the Twins. Well, MLB is going to own that. And how much are they paying the Twins? That's to be determined.
Mm-hmm.
Small market teams aren't going to enter into that agreement without having some assurance that there's going to be a decent chunk for them. And when MLB is going to produce a majority of these games, they're going to be able to dictate where that money goes. And these small market teams are going to get a bigger piece of the pie. And I think that's why there's going to be some maybe hesitancy to sell,
mm-hmm.
because there's going to be light at the end of the tunnel. And you don't know what that light is, but it's like you can't let teams go underwater. You can't let teams go bankrupt. MLB is going to foot that bill for you, because there's hundreds of billions of dollars exchanging hands every year, and it doesn't all have to end up with the Dodgers. And I don't know how long that's going to take, right? Is it going to be 5 years? Is it going to be 15 years? Who knows? But if you can wait it out, why wouldn't you if you're not getting the money that you want? So I do think that this might be a long process, but I do think that it's going to be okay potentially for the small market teams, because MLB can't let them go under.
I'm preparing myself for a post-2026 season work stoppage. That is my conclusion that I'm drawing, Jeremy, before we move on to some Twins roster battles here.
I do think that that's kind of where things are headed, right? That's what people expect. 2 more years, and then we wait again. And there's going to be a lot of things that have to get figured out. It's going to be an international draft. It's going to be a whole bunch of different stuff. But one of the big things is going to be, how do we keep these teams that don't have money working?
Yep.
That's why specific numbers are coming out. This never happened before. And so it's really interesting to see. But I do think that that's why the Polettes potentially hold on, is because they see the situation becoming what it is. It's not just one team. It's not just 2 teams. It's just 2 that we've heard. But I do think it's going to be a much bigger thing in the near future.
Mental note: if you're listening, if you hear me be optimistic about something, prepare for bad news. Jeremy, let's move on to some equally depressing topics, perhaps, but ones that we need to cover. We were talking this time last week about the last Twins roster spot battles, and those things have all come into focus. If I'm remembering correctly, when we spoke, Brooks Lee had been scratched from a game due to back tightness. He is now starting the season on the IL. So you've got Royce Lewis and Brooks Lee two of the three most significant Twins IL stints to start the season, along with Brock Stewart. I want to hone in on Lee specifically because we spent a good amount of time on the show talking about him, his rise through the minors, all of that good stuff. This is now back-to-back seasons, no pun intended, where he has started on the IL, 24, 25 years old, experiencing kind of chronic, persistent back issues. Does this change your long-term perception of what you think he can be at the major league level? Is it something you're not really worried about, or somewhere in the middle of those two possible outcomes?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's kind of somewhere in the middle. If it was two completely different injuries, non-related, I would say it's sometimes just that's bad luck.
Mm-hmm.
Because they've been related, because it's not necessarily a new thing. He had some, I think they were hip issues in college, and all of those are in my mind kind of connected. But at the same time, you have medical doctors and you have people that are able to get imaging and look at things and try to fix everything. I would have told you I wasn't super concerned about Alex Kirilloff's wrist, right? And then they cut his wrist out, and make it shorter, and then he retires. I think that's an extreme for Brooks Lee to say that this is going to be like a career-threatening thing, because he's been capable of playing long stretches of time and been productive. He wasn't great, right? With his offense struggled late in the year. But I do still think that there's hope. Young guys struggle, right? And so to me, it's not this huge thing where it's like, oh man, he was bad and now he's back. I think you got to give him a couple of years to really see what he has and give him a ton of at bats. It's a bummer, but I think a year ago, when he went down, it was like, oh no, he was going to be the next big thing. You can't pull the plug on him after 1 year at what?
For sure.
20, was he 23, 24?
24, I want to say.
So let's give him some time. It's a bummer. Like Royce Lewis is a bummer. You want to see your top, potentially top players, if not this year, in the future, being healthy and able to play. But someone made the comment that I just read, must have been the minor league director, made a comment about, we put too big of an emphasis on the opening day thing. And if guys aren't ready by opening day, and that's the thing with Brooks Lee, like, let's just make sure he's right and he'll be healthy when he's healthy.
I mean, that's fine. That's fine. And the reason we do that is because things like last year happened where Brooks Lee wasn't quite ready for opening day. And then it was 2.5 months before he was back doing rehab in St. Paul and eventually getting to the majors. So I agree with you a little bit. And let's not pretend that there's not a significant number of guys without track records of missing significant time, whether that's at the beginning of the season or elsewhere.
No, and I don't disagree with that at all. I think you're not going to try to push a guy to be ready because it's March 27th, right?
Yep.
Push a guy to be ready or make him play through it when it's October and it's a huge game. But let's make sure you're healthy for the summer when you're playing every day. And that's what the Twins have kind of done recently anyway. Is like April's kind of been a month where they're not necessarily preseason games, but they're kind of treated like preseason games. Just get through it, and then we'll compete for the summer.
Yep. And then two more. I wanted to quick touch on Jeremy. Mickey Gasper made the roster. I think maybe less surprising given the injuries and just the Twins' need for another bat. Maybe the one that was more up in the air was Austin Martin versus Deshaun Kersey Jr. Kersey made the team. Any surprises there given the Twins' corner guys are both left-handed? Obviously, you get speed and defense with Kersey. Any surprise he made the team over Austin Martin, and any major conclusions there from your perspective?
Not really. I think there's more concern about who's going to man the infield spots, and we just haven't seen Austin Martin do a ton of that lately. Bader, I believe he's also right-handed. He's going to probably play a little bit in the corners to start, and then you'll have Astro who could be in the outfield as well. And so I do think that it was just the two guys that I kind of assumed um, would get those spots. Would get those spots. They're not going to play a ton. I wouldn't assume. Gasper, who knows how healthy he is? What do you take? That's a spike and 6 stitches yesterday.
Yep.
Uh, but to have those guys more as bench pieces, and maybe Gasper works his way into a more regular role. I don't see Kiersey ever being that. But a very good fourth outfielder. Well, a good fourth outfielder, very good fifth outfielder, and then Gasper with kind of his probably going to be a second baseman, right? Um, but maybe could catch a little bit. I don't
I
really know.
don't know. I really don't know where he's going to play, and I'm interested to see how they use him because I mean the minor league track record is super legit. Gets on base a ton. Switch hitter, if kind of more so switch hitter by name, definitely better from the left side. So I don't know. Maybe he sees some first base. Maybe sees some second base. I don't think he's going to catch when you have Vasquez and Jeffers is year 1, 2. They've really handled that as a very 50-50 split the last couple of years. So interested to see where he ends up defensively.
Which I don't know that you necessarily have to say, oh, he's going to get a game or two, but you can handle your catchers differently, especially with a clear DH. If you want Vasquez to catch and Jeffers to DH, you can actually debate whether if Vasquez goes down, if we want to forfeit the DH or if we can let Gasper do it, right? And so I do think that there's just that. And I was trying to find out when he's last caught. Um, he only caught a couple games. I mean, he caught 36 games last year. So I do think that there's that option, which just it provides you with a little bit more depth if you want to go 50-50, fine. But if you want Jeffers' bat in the lineup because his bat was really good early last year, you can DH him without having to necessarily worry about the off chance that you have to forfeit your DH. So I do think he provides a little bit of extra depth when really he only played catcher in the minor leagues. He only played catcher and first base last year. Didn't play second base until he came up.
Yep.
So,
and I mean, based on the ball that he tried to field, that was absolutely Brandon Winokur's. We'll see if the second base thing ends up being a success, but I do think the bat has a shot to be useful. So
is he just? I mean, do you see him as a DH then?
I think at DH, maybe he gets some starts at first base if you want to platoon France at all. I'm not sure. I guess that's my big remaining question with him is going to be like, what did they think of him in his reps at second base? Like, what did he make of that? And maybe this is answered quickly. Maybe some combo of Lee and Lewis are back quick enough and he doesn't really get much run. I don't know how much playing time he's going to get at all, to be honest, but we'll see. And then one more for you, Jeremy. Final spot in the bullpen with Michael Tonkin and Brock Stewart, both starting the season on the IL. It doesn't sound like it's going to be too big of an issue for Stewart. Final bullpen spot goes to Randy Dobnak, a guy who maybe people had not kind of put his name forward as the guy who makes a ton of sense to fill this spot. But when you kind of think about his contract situation with the team, it really does make a ton of sense. Your thoughts on Dobnak getting another shot with the Twins at the back of the bullpen?
Yeah, I think it makes all the sense. Some rumblings yesterday that they didn't want to use a non-roster invitee that maybe deserved a spot because they didn't anticipate this spot being needed, or this. They didn't anticipate whoever was going to be in this position staying in this position for long. If you select a guy and then you activate anybody off the injured list, you would have to send that guy down without options. So you'd have to have clear waivers. So it was like, well, maybe watch the waiver wire and see. Dominic makes so much sense because, like you mentioned, his contract. So he's been selected and outrighted a number of times. Teams aren't going to claim him because you have to claim that the contract that he signed, years and years and years ago.
Yep.
Teams aren't going to do that. He's not going to refuse his assignment because he wants to collect that money. So you can keep him on a yo-yo, and it doesn't hurt you at all. It's actually the most. When I saw that today, it was today, right? When I saw that,
so.
Oh, yep. that's super logical. He'll be ready to be the long man in when his spot is needed. He just gets outrighted. He accepts his assignment to St. Paul, and he's there. I believe his contract expires at the end of this year.
Yep.
So this is the last time that it's going to work like this for him. But it was probably a one of those decisions where it's like we're gonna look at the waiver wire. We're gonna see if there's anybody we really like, we'll claim them. But we don't even. But knowing that Dobnak is a fallback plan, who actually was really good. Maybe not really good, but very serviceable in AAA last year.
Yep.
And I mean, you go back to him being the original Zebby Matthews, right? Climbs, makes a playoff start, has the finger muscle issue, and just isn't right for a couple of years.
Yep.
For all intents and purposes, has been a great teammate, great close guy, great community guy, and probably someone that fits really well in that clubhouse. So I think it's the right decision, good decision, and just keeps them. They could claim a guy off waivers tomorrow and outright Dobnak and nothing's hurt.
Yep.
And so I do think that it allows them that flexibility that they wanted anyway.
Yep. All the Twins bullpen needs is the buffer of someone who can offer length. I think it's maybe an under-discussed point that Michael Tonkin's purpose in the Twins bullpen is not necessarily because he's the most effective reliever they could get. His purpose in the bullpen is because he can pitch back-to-back days. He's a rubber arm dude. He's filling that role. Emilio Pagan, I guess, was the last guy who kind of filled that role. And if you don't have someone like that, obviously Iverson Cassiano, who was returned to the Phillies today, was kind of the other option. If you don't have a rubber-armed guy, you need a length guy, and that's exactly what Dobnak's going to be until other dudes in the bullpen are back healthy. Okay. We're moving on, Jeremy.
This is your time. This is your time to shine.
I'm so excited. We're finally digging into the 2025 MLB Draft. So I guess you're going to put a quarter in me and I'm just going to go. And what we really wanted to do today, because we're sickos and we want to talk about the draft in March, is we're going to start with the case for 1-1. And we actually did an episode just like this last year where we talked about guys like JJ Weatherholt and Travis Bazzana, who ended up going number 1 to Cleveland. And we're going to essentially have that same conversation and run through some candidates at a really high level to make sure that people who are even casually interested in the draft know some of the names that are possibly in the mix for this number 1 slot in what is looking like an absolute mess of a draft coming up in July.
How excited are you?
I'm extremely excited, even though I'm not very enthused about this draft class, just to get started and dig in, and also to see who you're interested in, who you like, because we always have slightly different preferences and perspectives on prospects. And I always get to this point, I'm like, oh, Jeremy hasn't gotten super into the weeds on the class yet, and then we start talking about it, and it turns out that you in fact have been doing plenty of reading and research and know your guys plenty well as well. So I'm excited to see who you like from the names that we talked through and how that might differ from guys I maybe like.
So it is March.
It is.
By the way.
It is.
So we're going to start with guys that typically you see at the top 1 or 2.
Yep.
I want to go out of order here because I think it makes more sense.
Okay.
So the guy that comes to mind for me first is Ethan Holiday, brother of Jackson, son of Matt. The funny thing is that however many years ago, 5 years ago, Jackson Holiday was not in at this time was not the case for 1-1. 3 years ago only. Jeez.
I know. I know, it's wild.
And I remember there's a Twins Daily article I posted, basically this in writing, and somebody said, well, what about Ethan Holiday? Excuse me, what about Jackson Holiday? And I'm like, that just isn't there yet. Well, then 3 months later, he is the guy, and then the number 1 prospect. So start with the youngest Holiday. That's just well, he's the youngest Holiday. There's one that's younger, but the younger of the 2 now that's going to be draft eligible for the first time, Ethan Holiday.
Yeah. So Yeah, I think exactly what you called out is right, which is that in 2022, Jackson Holiday was seen as a second-round prospect coming into the cycle, and he had this meteoric rise through just massive developmental leap after massive leap through the season, and ended up in the mix for 1-1. Pardon me, ended up getting taken there. Ethan Holiday and Jackson Holiday are not similar baseball players. Ethan Holiday has absolutely massive raw power. I mean, we're talking easy plus raw power. Definitely like a bigger frame, a more physical frame. I think it's likely he plays shortstop for his high school team in Oklahoma. It's likely he doesn't end up at shortstop. It's more of like a third base profile for me. There's a very patient, borderline, a little bit passive approach at the plate. And the question I think at the moment is there's some bat to ball / contact questions, both overall contact rate and end zone contact rate. What we should ground ourselves in, I think, is the fact that they are in very different places. Like we just referred to Jackson as like on the outside looking in when it was his draft year. Ethan Holiday started as number 1 on several draft boards. And I think that both speaks to his caliber as a prospect, but also the fact that this top 10 is a mess. I would not enjoy picking in the top 3 this year because I just don't feel clear about how it's going to sort itself out. Right now, by consensus, and there is now a fairly well tuned up consensus board that's ready to drop after I read back through and edit it. He's the number 4 player by consensus in a top 10 that is increasingly dominated by high school players, which means that you might like it. I think what we might end up seeing, and this is a guess, is a little bit of an overcorrection with Holiday, right? Where we say, oh, there's some contact questions and bat to ball questions. I would maybe make a bet that in a couple of months he's answered some of those, absolutely dominated his like high school competition in Oklahoma, and then we're talking about him as a top 2, in contention for 1-1. But his name's certainly in the mix. It's been in the mix since the beginning of the cycle, and he's absolutely the most famous prospect in this class on the prep side.
Okay. And then I'm going to ask you about the Texas A&M outfielder. You might have to fix my pronunciation here. Is it Laviolette?
Yep, you got it.
Jace Laviolette. So, outfielder, is it fair for me, because I know you love comps, right? Is it fair for me to put him in kind of like the Charlie Condon category of prospect here in his draft cycle?
That's an interesting comparison. And I'm going to say, well, it depends exactly what you mean, and cut across me if I'm like misinterpreting what you're saying. But Condon kind of started out around 10 and then, hit like 30 home runs last season and just like flew up to the very top. Laviolette was the preseason consensus number 1 prospect in this class. Like when I always make a board of like 25, 30 consensus guys, like before the college season and the amateur season starts, just to see how things are looking. Laviolette was the number 1 guy. So in that way, they differ slightly, but certainly similar profiles, right? In terms of absolutely massive raw power, some questions about the hit tool. Condon answered his. Laviolette is not really answering his with his early season performance. So you mentioned, right, like absolutely massive frame guy, 6'5", like 225, has been playing center field for Texas A&M the last 2 years. They got to the College World Series last year, had a really great run, and he just put up numbers, absolutely massive production. He's really struggled in the early going in 2024, and everything looks worse, Jeremy. Like his swing looks a little stiff. He's not moving as well. It doesn't look like he's the type of guy that's going to be able to stick in center field. There's a lot of swing and miss in zone in his game. And so if you put all of that together, you've got a power reliant corner outfield profile with an uncertain defensive home.
Which is Charlie Cobb, right?
Which is Charlie Condon, but the difference being that Charlie Condon had an incandescent 2024 season, and Jace Laviolette has just not found it yet. And we're coming up on week 3 of conference play in the SEC, and he's just really running out of time. So just to make it as concrete as possible, he started the season as the consensus #1 prospect. He's all the way down to 7 already, with some folks ranking him all the way down to the back end of the first round at this point. And so I think when we see more outlets update their rankings, we're going to see him continue to take a tumble. And my guess would be like by the end of, if we revisit this conversation in a month, he'll probably be sitting somewhere in the 10 to 20 range as opposed to the top 10.
Or he goes on a bender where he hits 8 home runs in 6 games, and all of a sudden everything that he was supposed to do, he's done. 23 games into the season, he's got 6 home runs. Mm-hmm. Last year, 68 games, he had 29. So not nearly on the same pace. Last year, he struck out 81 times in 68 games. This year, he struck out 22 times in 23 games, so less strikeouts. Mm-hmm. Last year, 64 walks in 68 games, so 81 to 64 walks or strikeouts to walks. This year in 23 games, 21 walks and 22 strikeouts. So while he may not be answering the swing and miss issues, there is this thing about, walking more. And that's like I told you, that's something I look at. And so those are relatively even. Do you have to trade that off for the power, right?
Yep.
So that's kind of the big question here. If he dropped on the board to where the Twins could draft him, you absolutely take him.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I would say that with both these guys, but yeah, not going in the right trajectory, but all of a sudden you start hitting a few home runs and everything works out better for you. Sorry, I didn't get the mute button on there. Let's now go through the pitchers.
Okay. So I'll be interested to get your takes on some of these guys. There's one guy who I just know you're going to fall in love with the profile. I just know it already. But there is a consensus #1 player who we should talk about. His name's Jamie Arnold, left-handed pitcher out of Florida State University. If we rewind to this time last year, Jeremy, remember when we had Carlos Galazzo on, we gave him a like this or that style questions, and we asked him Hagen Smith or Chase Burns. If there was a third pitcher in there for performance last year in college, it would have been Jamie Arnold. He is a slightly undersized left-handed pitcher, 6'1", 200, and he is putting up numbers again for the second consecutive season in the ACC, either best or second best conference in college baseball. Just to give you an idea of what we're talking about, he has missed, I want to say, a whole either 1 or 2 starts this season due to illness, actually. But he's striking out 12.41 guys per 9, walking 2.55 per 9. His FIP is 2.06. That's down from 2.19 last season. So we're talking about like an extremely strong track record of production in one of the best conferences in college baseball. Fastball's been up to 98 this year, which is a PR for him. He has a slider that is... It's nasty, both in terms of like the shape, but also it's one of those that comes at you from such an angle, especially if you're a left-handed hitter, you just have no chance. He was a drive line in the offseason working on a split change, so he's added that to his arsenal. That's still a little bit of a work in progress, but I think it's a good example of him kind of folding in another pitch. And he's really been the guy of this class so far on the college side that's had the most consistent performance. So he's consensus #1 at the moment, and by a fair margin. His like comp ranking is 2.6. The next player in the class is at 6.6. So he's far and away #1 consensus prospect at the moment.
So if he doesn't go on to the Nationals, he definitely goes #2 to the Angels, and then
I would think so.
Maybe he's their opening day starter in 2026.
Dude, it's possible. It's really possible. And this coming off the back, you saw the Ryan Johnson thing, right? The Angels
hasn't thrown a minor league inning. it made the opening day roster.
And
Yeah,
that is
that's
a
right.
guy who, just for the record, we liked plenty and has I have not a bad word to ever say about any prospect who gets drafted. I think he was like in the 50 to 65 range on the consensus board last year, drafted out of DBU, and has made the opening day roster for the Angels, having never thrown a minor league pitch. So
Impressive, but
there you
also the
go.
Angels.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Now there's another pitcher to talk about.
Yep. Another pitcher to talk about. This is a guy, Jeremy, I think you're maybe going to fall in love with. I'm currently 8th on the consensus board. His name is Seth Hernandez. He is a prep righty out of Southern California, 6'4", 195-pound right-hander. So you can hang the projectable label on him if you want to. Easily the highest ceiling arm in this class for me on the prep side. We also know that right-handed prep pitching is a very like, risky demographic, but think like Jackson Jobe. His fastball in one of his first starts this year was sitting 97 to 100, struck out 12 guys in his last start. This is against really good competition in Southern California. He has maybe the best changeup in the class as well. Shows an affinity for spin. Also curveball and a slider in the mix there too. And so if you're talking about Arnold, right, what you're getting there is a surefire rotation guy with the upside of someone who can start a playoff game. With Seth Hernandez, I think the upside, your like 95th percentile outcome is like a true ace. But obviously you have to bake in the risk factor there. But I think he absolutely is someone who could be in the mix for 1-1. Definitely one of a handful of guys and someone I think you will enjoy.
Has there ever been a prep righty to go 1-1?
That's a
Like,
great.
I feel like it's not. I feel like the risk of and this was the Cole Stewart thing, right? I love Cole Stewart, and people much smarter than me said, anytime you take anytime you consider taking a right-handed high schooler with a top 5 pick, it's a huge risk, right? And that was from the people that actually then made the decision to make that huge risk. And so I could see that being a down arrow for him, despite the fact that everything you said, right? There's more certainty in other places,
Yep.
but I do like this profile for absolute sure. Moving on, because before a handful 2 years ago, Skeens wasn't even the guy, right?
Was not.
Dolander was the guy. Skeens was kind of on the periphery. So who are the other pitchers that we need to be paying attention to?
Yeah, so a couple of names, and they're moving in different directions. So Tyler Bremner is a guy, right-handed pitcher from UC Santa Barbara. He'd be relatively young for the college class, like 6'2", 190. So like maybe not like ideal frame, but he was in kind of preseason top fives. Really good mover. Fastball sits 94 and 96, has been tops 98. Good ride on that pitch. He also has an elite changeup. That's him and Seth Hernandez, best 2 changeups in the class for me. That's like an MLB ready pitch already, like 20 inches of horizontal movement on that. Just like massive, massive whiff rates. He's gotten knocked around a little bit this season. Just not quite firing on all cylinders, playing against not the best competition. So Bremner is a guy who I think is moving down ever so slightly. The one thing I would say here, and we should try and keep this centered while we have these draft conversations all year, and you'll help me double down on this. It's easy to get caught up in what is the performance this year, but pro organizations are also drafting for what do we think we can do with this guy with their current traits? What do we think they can add and all of that stuff, right? And so we can get hyper fixated on the performance, but organizations are drafting for what do we think this guy can become? The other guy, Jeremy's moving in the opposite direction, moving up. Kyson Witherspoon, right-handed pitcher out of Oklahoma, University of Oklahoma. It's his second season there after being a junior college transfer. He is sitting 95 to 98, run the fastball up to 100. Really good slider. He's added a changeup that's performed really well since last season. There's like some reliever risk with a number of these guys, but he has absolutely posted pretty much every start so far this season. Since 2024, he's close to doubled his strikeout rate and close to halved his walk rate, which is something I pulled out that I feel like will appeal to you in particular. Um, Obviously, they're in the midst of conference play now, so that's going to be kind of the true test. But I think he's moving into position to being like college starting pitcher two in this class. Kyson Witherspoon is headed towards being a top 10 guy.
And will only be 20 on the at draft time. Like, so he's young too. Speaking of young, you mentioned this earlier. You said um, looking like a draft where you might see the top 10 dominated by high school players.
Yep.
We've only talked about one right to this point.
Yep.
So you're going to give me some more names because that's the demographic that I most prefer.
Okay. I'm going to give you three guys, and then your job will be to tell me which profile you most prefer at the end of the three guys. So the first guy I'll tell you about is Billy Carlson. He's a teammate of Seth Hernandez's. So if they are both drafted top 10, it'll be the first time ever high school teammates have been taken within the top 10. They also have another teammate in the top 35 on the consensus board. That Corona team is absolutely loaded. We're talking about, with Billy Carlson, a polished lock to be a plus shortstop at the next level. It's a plus glove, maybe a double plus arm. He's been up to 96, 97 on the mound. Really good hit tool. I'm going to say like above average hit, above average power. All of that power is not yet showing up in games. But some of those indicators like bat speed would indicate that there's kind of more on the way. I think he's the best defensive shortstop in the class, but if you throw all of that together, you've got plus defense, maybe a double plus arm, and then above average hit and power in an 18-year-old prospect who can probably hang a little bit more on the frame. There's a lot to like there. Another guy I'll bring up here is Kason Cunningham. He's going to be a really interesting case study in this draft for a couple of reasons. One, he's an undersized guy. He's always been an undersized guy, and there's certain teams that discriminate against undersized guys. He's also going to be 19 on draft day. So he's going to be an interesting indicator of like, which models value what type of thing. He's probably more your like stick on the dirt, but maybe not at shortstop type of guy. Defensively, probably the best hit tool in the prep class overall. Really short swing, can manipulate the barrel anywhere through the strike zone, covers the whole thing really well. Not a ton of power, more of kind of a gap to gap type approach. Like think like you're like Slade Caldwell type undersized guy from last year. There's a couple of examples of that in every draft. Above average arm, plus speed, but a lot to like in his profile. He's a prep guy out of San Antonio. And then Eli Willits is the last guy I'll bring up as a potential candidate. I think he would be on an underslot deal. He was originally a 2026 reclassified. He'll be one of the youngest prospects in the entire draft class. I can see your eyes lighting up as I'm saying this. Bloodlines in play there. His dad played for the Angels. He now coaches at Oklahoma, where he's committed. Really like polished offensive profile. He's a switch hitter, and he performs well from both sides of the plate. A little better from the left side. Another guy whose projection might kind of hang on what you think of the power and how much you think he might get into. He's like 6'1", 175. It's kind of like doubles gap power at the moment, but if he gets that to like average, then you have a really interesting prospect. Solid arm, solid glove, certainly a chance to stick at shortstop. And I think you're looking at like a 50th, 60th percentile outcome of being a solid big league regular. So if you stack up those three guys, Billy Carlson, Kason Cunningham, and Eli Willits, curious for your take on if you have an immediate preference out of those three guys, or kind of what you're marinating on thinking through those three profiles.
So the big point you made with Cunningham is he's 19 in the draft, right? The next month, Carlson turns 19. Then 4 months later, Willits turns 18. So we're talking apples and oranges here. Um, all things being equal, and you just got to choose from them. If they're relatively close, which I think that they are, if you can take the guy that's 17, you do that, right? So for me, that Willits is that guy. Um, I do really like Billy Carlson's profile, and so um, he would be number 2. But the fact that it's like we're talking about guys that are 2 years older, um, essentially almost a full 2 years older. Cunningham to me, smaller. That's not a downgrade for me most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
But in asking me to line these 3 up, I would go Willits, Carlson, Cunningham, without a whole lot of debate. But I do obviously think that there's time to make that up. But I do agree exactly with what you're saying. Like teams that model the models that knock you down for being older, like these 2 guys, Carlson and Cunningham, they're going to get way knocked down, right?
Yep.
And Willits is going to he's going to move up on the fact that he's reclassified. He would have to, spend the full 3 years on campus. The other 2, I think, would be draft eligible. Cunningham would definitely be draft eligible sophomore.
Yeah.
Carlson maybe not, but yeah, I mean, I think you could, depending on the flavor that you prefer, any of these 3 guys make a lot of sense, right? Maybe not at 1-1 yet, but in that back half of the top 10, I think all 3 of them make sense. You have one more name that you want to talk about. This is the guy that I know you've liked because he was where you started your profiles.
That's true. That is where I started. And one quick last thing on the prep guys, just to cap it off, because I like revisiting how the rankings shift. Billy Carlson currently number 3 on the consensus board. Cason Cunningham number 6. Eli Willits at number 9. Like you said, very little to choose between them. I think there's a good shot all 3 of those guys go in the top 10. Certainly the first 2. But yeah, one more guy I wanted to quickly cover. We haven't talked much about college hitters, and this draft class is a mess for college hitters. They just have not sorted themselves out yet. There's a lot of power dependent profiles with like questions about the hit tool. Ivor Arquette is currently number 2 on the consensus board, shortstop who transferred from the University of Washington to Oregon State, and stands out because of the frame mostly. He is like a Carlos Correa size shortstop. He's like 6'5", extremely athletic, explosive, does a ton of damage on contact, some of the most legit power in college baseball. He still has a little bit of some questions around the hit tool there. Chases a little too much and gets a little too aggressive sometimes. But he also has a good track record on the Cape, in the Cape Cod League, which is a wood bat league, which is a strong indicator for college prospects. And he's definitely someone who's ascended a little bit since preseason. I think he's like holding his own so far this college season. He's been good, not incredible, but currently number 2 on the consensus board and absolutely worth a mention. Someone I think will be long gone by the time the Twins get around to making it 16.
Yeah, and I do feel like, and maybe it's not every year, but I do feel like college hitters kind of move their way up, right? As you can't settle on, if you can't settle on right high schooler with the price tag being higher, pitchers are touchy with injuries. So far, there hasn't been a ton of them. College hitters are just they're really the safer demographic that you can get, and so I do think there's some truth to Arquette being, if he's just good enough, he's going to get looks in the top 5 for sure. And if he can stick at short long term, which I think at this point the belief is that he could, there's even more to like about that. So I know you're a fan. I love that profile. He's going to certainly make a team, make some team happy with his production.
That he is. And so that's kind of a overview of some of the guys who might be in the mix for number 1. I think as we continue through the cycle, we'll dig into like 5, 6, 7 more profiles at a time. I'll be really interested, Jeremy, to do the next batch with you because we'll really cover the spots where a lot of the teams that we cover are picking, and kind of that 14 to 20 range on draft day is going to be like a nightmare for us. I have no idea how we're gonna handle that with
Bush Light.
with
Lots of
writing
bush.
and
No,
with what?
just Bush Light. That's all I'm gonna
Yeah,
do.
okay, there you go.
Lots of bush.
Um, but yeah, there's some interesting names in there. I'll be excited to dig in with you. What I did want to do is finish up with a couple of draft questions I thought were great, both from Corey on Blue Sky, and there are a couple of twin specific draft questions. And I think we'll have some decent answers to these, hopefully. So he asked, are the specific traits for a hitter that the Twins prioritize, all things being equal? Would they target something like bat to ball skills over other traits like power? So curious for your take here, Jeremy. Don't want to put you on the spot. I can dig in first if you prefer, but anything that springs to mind for you as traits that the Twins prioritize in their draftable hitters?
Yeah, I think they don't really put a lot of emphasis on where the guy's going to end up defensively. They're just looking for guys who can barrel up the ball.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever you read any scouting report on anybody, if it says anything about their hit tool or one of the best hitters in the draft, that's a green flag for the Twins. Um, Whether that is someone that maybe develops into power, and they will take their chances. But when you look at the guys that they've drafted, like the first maybe and the second hitters that they've taken every year, it's always been about guys that there's not a lot of questions about their hit tool, right? It's a 60, and maybe there's some questions about kind of things on the periphery, but they're going to control the zone. They're going to get bat on ball. Um, the Walker Jenkins to Keishel to um, Zhao to all the guys,
DeBarge, all those guys.
all these guys, and then they take their shot later with the Whitakers and the Amics. Um, but I do really think that they emphasize bat to ball first. But then they're gonna sell out on power guys and see if they can improve the bat to ball on some of those as well.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. Would also add two more notes. I think we've often seen them target a guy who had a power breakout in their final season, particularly for college hitters. Tanner Schobel and Luke Keishel are both good examples of that. So that's something to pay attention to. And then I would also give a non-example. I think something they do not care about is swing decisions. I think the Twins feel like they can improve hitters' swing decisions significantly. A couple of examples, either via the draft or trade. Gabby Gonzalez chases an absolute ton. He's one of the hitters they picked up in the Jorge Polanco trade. On the draft side, Kalen Culpepper, their first round of last year, came into the draft with a chase rate north of 30%, which is more than you would like to see and more than a lot of teams would like to see. I think the Twins do not care about what your swing decisions look like coming in. They feel like they can make a dent in that, and they certainly have. Keishel is actually another great example of that. Keishel dropped his swing percentage by about 15% from his last year in college to joining the Twins, and became one of the most patient hitters in the minor leagues. So there's a bunch of proof points that they can help guys with their swing decisions, and it's not something they necessarily target in the draft. Corey's second question, Jeremy, what types of traits do they prioritize for a pitcher? Age, height, fastball shape, types of secondaries. Those are all examples that Corey gives. Anything spring to mind for you on the pitching side?
Yeah, I think for me it's like fastball command. If you have guys that can command their fastball, um, I feel like that's kind of their ball of clay that they want to start working with,
Mm-hmm.
uh, because from there you can soup up the velocity, you can figure out a slider, curveball, sweeper, changeup, whatever, which they've if there's guys that can command a fastball and have some feel to spin it a little bit, those are kind of the guys that you add 5 miles an hour to, bulk them up a little bit, They tinker with these deliveries. So I do think there's also, and I'd have to look, but one thing I have heard is they're more apt to get guys that they feel like maybe haven't been coached the best, right? Not to say that they're not looking at well coached players, but it's like if they feel like a guy's coming from a program that isn't, and I'm not saying that they don't take them from good programs, they obviously do, but if they look at a guy and say, man, the coaching here hasn't been great, we can
Mhm.
make some small adjustments and get way more out. Um, they've been known to hit on those guys. So, I think like a lot of Northeast stuff where there just hasn't been a lot of, the ability to play a lot because it's cold and the weather's bad. Uh, they've had success in the Northeast. Maybe some prep guys in the deep Southwest. They've had
Small
success.
colleges in California.
Small colleges in California, small colleges everywhere,
Yep.
right? Madison, Wisconsin,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You find guys, and so like I said with hitters, they're not gonna fall into their trap of taking everybody out of that same group.
Mhm.
But if they have guys that can throw fastballs for strikes, you make little adjustments, and all of a sudden they're a way more complete pitcher. So from my perspective, that's kind of where it starts. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, 100% agree. I think I wrote down in our notes strikes. If you look at some of the guys they've had most success with, Zebby Matthews is the best example. I think he came in as like an elite strike thrower with a kind of interesting fastball shape. I think the Twins tend to take more north-south movement profiles than east-west, and what we mean by that, right, is a like higher ride fastball that plays well at the top of the zone as opposed to like a sinker slider moving laterally type guy. Although there are increasingly a number of those guys in the Twins minor league system. So strikes would be the first thing. Thinking about what the Twins do well developmentally. Um, we talk about it all the time. They're great at adding velo. Everyone is gonna get an uptick at least a little bit, and so they're not necessarily drafting for that. They're also increasingly getting really, really good, I think, at pitch and arsenal design. Again, coming back to the Zebby Matthews example, um, his first minor league season, he didn't have his current pitch mix. He had a sweeper, and they tried to support him in throwing a sweeper for about 6 months. It just never clicked for him. They eventually banged that and split his cutter into two different distinct pitches, more of like a gyro slider and then a high vert cutter, and that's kind of was his like breakthrough of working through hitters in the upper minors. So 100% strikes, and they'll worry about adding the velo, and they'll worry about developing the arsenal over time. That's the number one thing I would offer for the pitchers. Jeremy, we're about to call it a day. The Twins play their first game the day after tomorrow, and the final score of that game is going to be what against the St. Louis Cardinals? Opening day prediction, please.
6-4 Twins.
Love it. Just to finish up with some housekeeping notes. Things Theo says 6-2 Twins. I'm gonna go massive blowout. 10-1 Twins.
Wow.
And the Twins are absolutely gonna put it to Sonny Gray.
That's you being optimistic, which means the Twins
That's
are
me,
going
but yeah, that's me being
to 0.
optimistic. So book it for an opening day loss. I'm finishing up with some housekeeping quick before we get out of here. Ways that you can support the show by liking and subscribing on your podcast platform of choice. Even better if you can leave us a positive review. Places you can find our content on YouTube. The handle is @Destination the Show. We love to hear from folks and interact with people on social media. You can find us on Twitter @DTS_pod1 or on Blue Sky @Destination the Show. That's a much more pleasant social media platform. If you want to send us an email, you can do so, destinationtheshow@gmail.com. We will be back next week. We are tentatively hoping to dig into all of the Twins minor league rosters for the 2025 season as we're getting ready for minor league baseball. So that's our game plan for next week. Until then, enjoy the first few games of the season. Baseball is back. Take it easy, everybody.